Imagine you're playing hide and seek, but the other kid can run twice as fast as you. They can turn corners quicker. They can climb faster. Every time you think you found a hiding spot, they find you first. That's what it felt like for American pilots fighting against Japanese Zero fighters in 1942. It felt impossible to win. But then a farm boy from South Dakota changed everything. Not with a faster plane or a bigger gun, but with a trick he learned hunting rabbits when he was 12 years old. This is the true story of Joe Foss, and it's going to teach you something amazing. Sometimes the smartest solution comes from the most unexpected place. Let me paint you a picture of what American pilots were facing. October 9th, 1942. High above a jungle island called Guadalcanal, a young pilot named Marion Carl was in serious trouble. He was flying an American fighter plane called the Wildcat, a tough, heavy plane that felt like flying a truck. Chasing him was a Japanese Zero, and it was like nothing American pilots had ever seen before. The Zero was light. It could spin and turn like a hummingbird. When American pilots tried to turn their planes to follow it, the Zero would already be behind them, its guns firing. It was faster in climbs. It could outturn any American plane by a mile. For the past year, Zeros have been winning almost every fight in the Pacific. From Pearl Harbor to the Philippines, Japanese pilots seemed unstoppable. American pilots were terrified of them. That day, Marion Carl tried everything. He dove his Wildcat down, the Zero followed. He turned hard, but his plane turned slowly, like trying to steer a shopping cart with a broken wheel. The Zero was already there, waiting for him. Then Carl's plane exploded. Bullets tore through his cockpit. His controls stopped working. He had to jump out with a parachute and landed in shark-filled ocean waters. He barely survived. This wasn't just one bad day. This was happening every single day at Guadalcanal. American pilots called their airfield the graveyard because so many pilots never came back. The problem seemed impossible to solve. How do you beat an enemy who's faster, lighter, and more agile than you? The answer came from a most unlikely hero, a 27-year-old farmer who'd been told he was too old to fight. Joe Foss didn't grow up dreaming of being a war hero. He grew up poor on a farm in South Dakota, so remote they didn't even have electricity. When Joe was young, America fell into something called the Great Depression, a time when millions of families lost everything. For the Foss family, it meant the farm was dying. The crops wouldn't grow. There was barely any food. But Joe's father taught him something that would one day win a war. He taught him how to hunt. "We need meat for dinner," his father would say, handing young Joe an old shotgun. "Don't waste bullets. Make every shot count." Now, hunting might sound easy, but Joe wasn't hunting slow animals. He was hunting jackrabbits, and jackrabbits are tricky. They don't run in straight lines. They zigzag. They dart left, then right, then double back. If you aim right at a jackrabbit, you'll miss every time because by the time your bullet gets there, the rabbit is already somewhere else. Joe's father taught him the secret. Don't aim where the rabbit is. Aim where the rabbit is going to be. This is called leading your target, and 12-year-old Joe got really, really good at it. He'd watch a rabbit running, calculate in his head how fast it was moving, figure out where it would be in the next second, and shoot at that empty spot. The rabbit would run right into his bullet. He wasn't just shooting. He was thinking 3 moves ahead, like playing chess. This skill, this farmer's trick of seeing the future before it happened, would one day save hundreds of American lives. But first, Joe had to overcome something even harder than Japanese Zeros. He had to overcome the people who said no. When Joe was 18, his father took him to an air show. Joe watched Marines flying biplanes through the sky, doing loops and rolls, and something clicked in his heart. "That's what I'm going to do," he told his father. But life had other plans. His father died in a tragic accident, and 19-year-old Joe had to drop out of school to run the farm and take care of his family. His dream of flying seemed impossible. Most people would have given up. Joe didn't. He worked the farm during the day and took classes at night. It took him 6 years to earn enough credits to go to college. He washed dishes to pay for flying lessons. He refused to quit. Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japan attacked America, and the country went to war. Joe raced to join the Navy as a pilot. He'd finally get his chance to fly. But they rejected him. "You're too old," they said. "Fighter pilots have to be 25 or younger. You're 26. Sorry." Can you imagine? Joe had worked his whole life for this moment, and they told him he'd missed his chance by 1 year. They offered to let him be a flight instructor, teaching younger kids how to fly while he stayed safely on the ground. For 9 long months, Joe watched as the students he trained were sent off to war. He was stuck at home, feeling useless. But Joe had something special inside him. The same stubbornness that made him finish school while running a farm. The same determination that made him a perfect shot with a rifle. We could call it grit or persistence, but it was more than that. It was a farmer's refusal to accept defeat. He made so much noise, writing letters, bothering his commanders, demanding a chance, that finally, just to get him to stop talking, they gave in. "Fine," they said. "We'll send you to the Pacific. But don't say we didn't warn you." In October 1942, 27-year-old Grandpa Joe, as the younger pilots called him, stepped onto a transport plane heading for Guadalcanal, the most dangerous place in the entire war. The moment Joe arrived at Guadalcanal, he knew he'd entered a nightmare. The airfield wasn't a proper military base. It was a dirt runway carved out of the jungle, surrounded by wrecked airplanes and tents with mud floors. The smell of oil, rotting plants, and death hung in the humid air. Everywhere Joe looked, he saw the wreckage of American planes. Wildcats with their wings torn off, cockpits stained with blood. These weren't just broken machines. They were the graves of pilots who'd fought and lost. The pilots Joe met weren't the excited young men he'd trained back home. They were exhausted. Their skin was yellow from malaria medicine. Their eyes were hollow from lack of sleep and too much fear. They'd seen too many friends die. When Joe walked into their tent, they barely looked at him. To them, he was just another replacement for a pilot who'd been killed yesterday. Joe was assigned a Wildcat fighter, the same plane Mary and Carl had been shot down in. It was heavy, slow. Against the lightning-fast Zero, it felt like bringing a tractor to a race car competition. An officer named Duke gave Joe the standard briefing. Never turn with a Zero. If you try to outturn them, you're dead. Your only chance is to dive away, use your speed, and escape. Joe listened carefully. He understood the logic. But deep down, he also understood something the officers didn't. He understood jackrabbits. Joe's first flight over Guadalcanal wasn't practice. It was life or death from minute one. He climbed his Wildcat to 15,000 feet, scanning the bright blue sky. His squadron mates had warned him, Zeros come out of the sun. You never see them until they're shooting. Suddenly, the radio crackled. Bandits! Enemy planes 11 o'clock high. Joe looked up and saw them, Japanese Zeros diving down like hawks. He remembered his orders. Don't turn. Dive and escape. Joe pushed his control stick forward, sending his heavy Wildcat into a screaming dive. The Zeros followed. One opened fire. Bullets zipped past his cockpit, so close he could almost feel them. He dove all the way down to the jungle treetops before the Zeros gave up and flew away. Joe returned to base, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from frustration. This isn't right, he thought. Running away doesn't win the war. It just means you live to run away tomorrow. Joe hadn't come all this way, hadn't fought all those years just to survive. He'd come to hunt, and hunters don't run from their prey. They outsmart it. A few days later, Joe was leading a patrol when they encountered Japanese bombers protected by Zeros. A massive dogfight erupted, planes twisting and turning everywhere. Joe spotted a Zero closing in on his wingman's tail. The Japanese pilot was about to shoot down an American plane. Everything Joe had been taught said, dive away, find an easier target. But Joe's farmer instincts said something completely different. He rolled his Wildcat hard, not toward the Zero, but toward a patch of empty blue sky ahead of where the Zero was flying. Then he did something that looked crazy. He pulled the trigger and fired his 6 machine guns at nothing. At empty air. It looked like a mistake, like he'd missed by 200 feet. But the Japanese pilot, focused on his own target, didn't see Joe's bullets streaking through the sky. He executed a perfect tight turn to shoot down the American plane and flew directly into the wall of bullets Joe had fired 3 seconds earlier. The Zero's wing simply ripped off. The plane exploded in a cloud of fire and metal. Joe had just gotten his first kill. But more importantly, he'd proven something revolutionary. You don't beat the zero by being faster. You beat it by being smarter. When Joe landed, the exhausted pilots gathered around him. "How did you do that?" they asked. Joe smiled. "Stop chasing them," he said. "You can't catch a jackrabbit by running after it. You have to shoot where it's going to be. Let your target. Let it more than you think. Let it until it feels like you're going to miss. Then lead it even more. They'll fly right into your bullets." This was the secret, the farmer's trick. It wasn't a physical modification to the plane. It was a mental shift, a completely new way of thinking. The desperate pilots listened. They needed hope. And this old farmer was offering them something new, a way to hunt instead of just try to survive. Joe took command of 8 Wildcat pilots, a ragtag group of new arrivals and worn-out veterans. The press gave him a nickname, Foss's Flying Circus. On October 16th, the circus went hunting. They encountered 32 Japanese planes, 32 against 8. It should have been a massacre. But Joe had a plan. He taught his pilots to fly in pairs, protecting each other's backs in something called the thatch weave. When one pilot was being chased, his partner would swoop in from the side. Joe dove into the fight. He saw a zero. He didn't aim at it. He aimed at the empty space where it was turning. He fired. The zero exploded. Another zero dove on him from above. But Joe's wingman, weaving back and forth with him, saw it coming. The wingman shot the zero off Joe's tail before it could fire. The circus worked like a machine, like 8 people playing the perfect team sport. In 10 minutes, they shot down 5 Japanese planes. All 8 American planes came home safely. The graveyard was suddenly winning. What happened next was almost unbelievable. October 18th, Joe shot down 2 more zeros. October 20th, another kill. October 23rd, Joe became an ace, a pilot with 5 victories. October 25th, 3 zeros in a single day. The old farmer who'd been told he was too old to fight was now the most dangerous pilot on the island. But success in war comes with a price. The Japanese noticed. They started hearing Joe's name on their radio intercepts. Their command was furious. How were their superior zeros being shot down by inferior American planes? They began hunting specifically for Foss and his circus. On November 7th, Joe was jumped by elite Japanese aces. In the chaos, his plane was hit by cannon fire from behind. His engine exploded. He had to bail out and parachute into the jungle. 2 days later, he was back in the air. This time, while chasing an enemy plane, he was so focused on getting the kill that he didn't see the rear gunner. Bullets shattered his engine. His plane was dead. Worse, he wasn't over land. He was over the ocean. Joe's Wildcat hit the water hard and sank in 30 seconds. He inflated his life vest and floated alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 10 miles from land. Then he saw them, fins, dozens of shark fins, circling. Joe, the man who'd hunted zeros, was now being hunted by something far older and more terrifying. The sharks bumped against him, got closer. Joe had no weapon, no radio, just his will to survive. For 4 hours, he floated in that shark-filled water, watching the fins circle tighter. Finally, just as the sun was setting, a canoe appeared. Native islanders who'd been sent by an Australian coast watcher who'd miraculously seen Joe's plane go down. They beat the water with their paddles to scare the sharks away and dragged the exhausted pilot to safety. When Joe got back to base, the doctors ordered him to rest. He had malaria now, a disease that causes terrible fevers. He was supposed to stay in bed. The Japanese thought he was dead. The ghost of Guadalcanal was finally gone. They were wrong. 2 weeks later, Joe walked out of the hospital, climbed into a new Wildcat, and went hunting again. On November 30th, he shot down another zero. The ghost was back. By January 15th, 1943, Joe Foss had shot down 23 Japanese planes. He was just 3 kills away from an almost mythical record. In World War I, a legendary pilot named Eddie Rickenbacker had shot down 26 enemy planes, a record that had stood for 25 years. Nobody had even come close to matching it. And now a farmer from South Dakota, flying an inferior plane, was about to break it. But Joe was falling apart. The malaria was destroying him from the inside. He'd lost 30 pounds. He shook with fever constantly. His ground crew would have to lift him, drenched in sweat, out of his cockpit after each flight. Doctors forbid him from flying. He ignored them. On January 15th, word came of a massive Japanese attack, dozens of planes heading for the island. Joe, barely able to stand, pulled himself into his cockpit. The sky turned black with planes, the biggest air battle Joe had ever seen. Through his fever-blurred vision, Joe fell back on his instincts. He saw a Zero attacking an American plane. He didn't think, just reacted. He rolled, aimed at empty air where the Jackrabbit would be, and fired. The Zero flew right into his bullets and disintegrated. Kill number 24. He spotted another Zero diving on American planes. Joe cut off. The Japanese pilot tried to outturn him, the classic Zero tactic. Joe didn't take the bait. He rolled over the top and came down from the blind spot. One perfect burst. Kill number 25. He tied the record. Then he saw one more enemy plane trying to escape. Joe dove after it. The enemy pilot pulled into a desperate climbing turn. Joe calculated. He pushed his nose up and fired an arcing shot that seemed impossible. The bullets traveled in a perfect curve, meeting the exact point where the enemy plane was climbing. Direct hit. Kill number 26. In a single afternoon, while shaking with malaria, Joe Foss had broken the unbreakable record. When he landed, the entire base was waiting. The ghosts of the Cactus Air Force, no longer haunted, now victorious, carried the old farmer on their shoulders. He was America's ace of aces. Here's what you need to understand about what Joe Foss did. In 1942, America was losing the war. The Zero seemed unbeatable. Japanese forces seemed unstoppable. American morale was at rock bottom. Then a farm boy who'd been rejected as too old proved something incredible. An American pilot in an American plane could beat the very best the enemy had. Joe Foss shot down 26 planes in just 44 days. But his real victory was bigger than numbers. The deflection, shooting, and teamwork tactics he perfected became the new way American pilots fought for the rest of the war. He didn't just win battles. He taught an entire generation of pilots how to win. He broke the myth. He brought hope. And he helped turn the tide of the entire war. Days after breaking the record, Joe's body finally gave out. The malaria had won. He was evacuated on a stretcher, a skeleton of his former self, his body broken by the island he'd helped save. But on May 18, 1943, Joe Foss stood in the White House. President Roosevelt placed the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for bravery, around his neck. After the war, Joe didn't forget where he came from. He went back to South Dakota. He entered politics to help his people. In 1954, that same farmer who'd been told he wasn't good enough was elected governor of South Dakota. He spent the rest of his life serving others, becoming the first commissioner of the American Football League and a beloved national hero. But he was always, at his core, that farm boy who understood a simple truth. You don't win by being the biggest or the fastest. You win by being the smartest. Joe Foss died in 2003 at age 87. He was buried with full military honors, a hero, a legend, and proof that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Here's why Joe Foss's story matters to you. Right now, today, think about the problems you face. Maybe there's a subject in school that seems too hard. Maybe there's a sport where other kids are bigger and faster than you. Maybe you feel like everyone else has advantages you don't have. Joe Foss faced Japanese Zeros, planes that were objectively better than his. Everyone told him he couldn't win. The experts said the Zero was unbeatable. But Joe had something no engineer could design and no manual could teach. He had a farmer's wisdom. He had grit. He had the refusal to accept impossible. And he had a simple trick he learned hunting rabbits when he was 12. That's the magic of this story. The solution to an impossible problem came from the most ordinary place imaginable. A farm, a childhood, a father teaching his son how to hunt. The answers you need might already be inside you. They might come from something you learned when you were young. They might come from a place nobody else is looking. When the world says you're not good enough, when they say you're too old, too young, too small, too different, remember Joe Foss. Remember the farm boy who was told no and turned it into watch me. Remember the hunter who looked at an unbeatable enemy and thought, "This is just a really fast jackrabbit." Remember that sometimes the smartest solution comes from the most unexpected place. Your place. If this story inspired you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what dreams you're chasing. Leave a comment below. Let's build a community of people who refuse to accept impossible. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.